Did you know Sonic is a Japanese character designed to appeal to Western audiences? Bet you didn't know that. Despite this, the series went through a lot of changes when being localized for a Western audience. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yada yada, Greg Martin redesign, Robotnik or Eggman, comics and TV shows, Sonic Bible, yada yada. But I'm not here to talk about any of that boring stuff. Let's talk about more interesting regional differences that people rarely talk about. The biggest ones are the changes to the manuals in the West. In the Western manual stories, South Island and West Side Island are never mentioned, and it's just Mobius. Sonic CD's manual also calls Amy Princess Sally. Man, Princess Sally sure looks not like Princess Sally. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the first game where the plot remains pretty much unchanged outside of taking place on Mobius and obviously the whole Robotnik thing. That's because there's a lot of story in the game itself, so it'd be hard to alter. Most people think that started with Sonic Adventure, but a lot of aesthetic and storytelling things that people think started in Sonic Adventure started in that game. Meanwhile, we have Tails Adventure and Chaotix, which have different stories depending on the region. Chaotix's story is stupid in the US manual, as it says Knuckles is the guardian of Carnival Island. So what happened to the other place? Carnival Island is what they call Neutrogic High in the manual. The manual also created the concept of the Chaotix as a name for a group, so I guess that's cool. Meanwhile, the American manual for Tails Adventure, in my opinion, improves upon the Japanese stories, as it states it takes place after Sonic 2, whereas the Japanese manual says it's a prequel. I'll get more into this in its own video. But after Sonic Adventure, the game's stories had no choice but to align with the Japanese stories. They tried to smoothen the transition into calling Robotnik Eggman in the West, and while it wasn't done that great, they tried. There's also some translation errors and mild script changes in the later games, but they're too stupid to talk about, and I'll just leave that to the fans that don't realize that they can change the scripts and localization, whether on accident or on purpose. Now let's get into Japan exclusive Sonic games, because despite it being made for Western audiences, Sega still locked us out of the full experience. The first being Sonic Eraser. It's not actually known when this game was released, so it could have been the first Sonic game ever to be released. What we do know is that it was released in 1991 for the Mega Modem, a Japanese exclusive online service for the Mega Drive. This game is probably most infamous for its music. It's what you're hearing in the background. I think the melody at the core of the song is actually pretty good, but it's the arrhythmic clanking that kills it. And no, that's not part of the gameplay, that's part of the song. It feels like a mistake, but you won't believe who composed it. Masaru Setsumaru, the sound director for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, who's worked on many other Sonic games since. As for the gameplay, it's a puzzle game, and it's actually one of the weaker ones I've played. It's passable, though I like the Sonic sprites that beat each other up. Next, we have the infamous Sega Sonic set of games, most notably Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car, a game released in 1991 that betrays the vision of Sonic by having him hand out speeding tickets. What a hypocrite! Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter Galaxy Patrol, because I too love words. It's sort of a shoot 'em up, and I love shoot 'em ups. I would actually love to see an actual Sonic shoot 'em up. Yeah, I know about Frontiers. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, best known for introducing Mighty and Ray. Strangely enough, in the files there exists a sprite for a SatAM inspired Robotnik that was intended to be used for overseas releases, which is weird because the game has full Japanese voice acting, so would they have replaced it with English voice acting in an overseas release? Who knows? Then of course there's the goat of goats, Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop, which was a game you could play while waiting for your popcorn in Japanese movie theaters. There's also the canceled Sega Sonic Bros, a game that was technically canceled and technically wasn't because it had location tests in Japan, but I guess it failed them because, you know, I don't know, Sonic has one eye, Japanese people don't know what a needle rat is. Games like this are the reason I'm so interested in lost media. people didn't even know it existed for 25 years. It's crazy to me that people could just not discover things for so long. There's also some newer Japan exclusive arcade games, but they're less interesting to talk about, and I know you've all seen Cyber Show. Some of the Game Gear games were also Japan exclusive for whatever reason. Sonic Drift was Japan exclusive, despite the fact that there's literally nothing to localize or translate in that game, and I'll come back to its sequel later. And so was Tails Sky Patrol. I'm guessing it had something to do with the weird licensing and the development of the game, which I find interesting, but I can't get into here. I'll leave a link to the Game Apologist video about it if you're interested. There are also a massive amount of Western exclusive Sonic games, but is the fact that Japan didn't get Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine really that interesting? I mean, I guess the fact that they didn't get Sonic Rivals 2 is kind of interesting, but I'm not going to get into that. There's nothing to really say about it. Moving on. Now let's get to the most interesting part. Name changes. Oh yeah! The first name change was the Sonic and Tails series. Sonic and Tails was renamed to Sonic Chaos over here, while Sonic and Tails 2 was renamed to Sonic Triple Trouble. I actually think the Triple Trouble name is a way better explanation of the game, but Sonic and Tails 2 lets you know it's a sequel. In the West, you don't really get that, and I bet there were a lot of kids who were like, wow, this game's a lot like Sonic Chaos. The Game Gear South Island platformer chronology is strange. We start simple with Sonics 1 and 2, then we move into a new duology with Sonic and Tails, and then G-Sonic. Wait, what? Yes, the infamous Sonic Blast was called G-Sonic in Japan. It was part of the Kids Gear line of games in Japan, an initiative started by Sega at the end of the Game Gear's lifespan. Unfortunately, that was lost on us, and a lot of people thought it was a port of Sonic 3D Blast, or Sonic 3D, Flicky's Island, as it was called everywhere besides North America. Yes, North America and Europe got different titles from each other. The game wasn't even released in Japan until 1999, making it the last Saturn game, as I mentioned in my Sonic Adventure prototype video. But the Mega Drive version didn't even make it to Japan. I think Flicky's Island is definitely a better name, as it underplays the 3D element so as not to trick you, and informs you about the true gimmick of the game, which is collecting the Flickies. The game was also always intended to have that title, coming from Europe, from British studio Traveller's Tales, best known for the Lego games. Weirdly, despite Europe going with the US canon, the two Traveller's Tales games are pretty tame compared to games like Sonic Spinball and Mean Bean Machine, which go all out with the Western Sonic canon, with them staying in line with the Japanese canon, with Flicky's Island obviously running with the island theme of the Japanese canon. It's the lamest island, but still. Though Sonic Team working on these two games alongside them may have had something to do with them sticking to the Japanese canon. Speaking of Europe and bringing it back to the Game Gear, remember how I mentioned Sonic Drift was Japan exclusive? Well, in North America, we did get Sonic Drift 2, still named Sonic Drift 2. There was probably some poor kid out there who made it their life mission to find the first Sonic Drift, only to find it and obviously be disappointed. But in Europe, they actually made the smart decision to call the game something different, calling it Sonic Drift Racing. The title screen still says Sonic Drift 2, but E for effort. As for other name changes, they had the bravery and confidence to name Knuckles Chaotix just Chaotix in Japan, which is a way better name. They renamed Sonic the Fighters to Sonic Championship during its initial arcade run in the West because, get this, they didn't want Sonic to be associated with violence. Obviously, this name was so lame and generic that a lot of people don't even know about it. While Sonic the Fighters is a weird name from a grammar perspective, it still just sounds cooler. After that game and G-Sonic, Sonic games shared names across regions for the most part, until the weirdest thing ever happened. And I mean every single Sonic game released in 2008 has a different name in Japan. Sonic Unleashed is called Sonic World Adventure over there. It's a nice name that's accurate to some extent, but it's also not representative of the biggest aspect of the game that makes it unique. It's like calling a movie when it's actually a Goofy movie. Sonic Riders Zero Gravity is called Sonic Riders Shooting Star Story in Japan, which just sounds less cool, which doesn't work for a game like Sonic Riders. That's like calling a game Sonic Edge Razor Shimmering Sparkles. Lastly, Sonic Chronicles The Dark Brotherhood is called Sonic Chronicles Invaders from the Dark Dimension over there. This is one of the strangest mysteries in Sonic history. I mean, the Japanese titles are pretty bad in my opinion, but why were they all changed for just 1 year? I never hear anyone talk about this, but I really want to know what was going on there. There's also other regional differences between Europe and North America other than Sonic 3D and Sonic Drift 2. The Western exclusive Sonic Classics in North America is Sonic Compilation in Europe. And of course there's Sonic Colors. There hasn't been much of these regional changes since 2008 though, with the exception of Sonic Generations, which has subtitles to distinguish between the 3DS and HD versions in Japan. They're actually pretty cool. And Sonic Boom being called Sonic Tune in Japan, which is weird. That's about all I have. Feel sunshine or something, I can't end videos.